How can Christians react to possibly necessary cancellations of badly behaving fantasy creators? I'm Zachary Russell, and this is episode 54 of Fantastical Truth. This is our second episode in a two-part series about free speech and cancel culture. In part one, Stephen Burnett and I examined the difference between necessary canceling and legalistic canceling. We discussed how Christians can respond to this phenomenon, how we can even love our enemies in the cancel mobs, with a few recent examples from popular culture. Now for part two, we'll look at how we can deal with the stories created by the canceled, especially when the cancellation was deserved. Stephen and I look at two more recent examples. What do we do with fantastical worlds and their creators when these creative heroes turn out to be the villains?
Another thing that it has helped me to recognize is that people who have suffered genuine trauma or think they have are looking for a community. And so even if their trauma wasn't that bad, they're going to find in the trauma of those for whom it was very bad, they will find in them a language to express their own stories. Now, maybe I had a pretty terrible youth group. I may especially resonate then with someone who came out of a genuine cult, where they were abused and there was, terrible, terrible teaching and, genuine being cut off from society. I may be a college graduate, but find myself, strangely attracted to the story of someone who, never even graduated from high school because their cult was so manipulative. And then all those folks can get together and they find, hey, together, we have a shared interest in striking back against the powerful. And I think this is how these kinds of groups get started. And what also tends to happen is that white knighting thing you mentioned, Zach, is that in becoming a hero, I can cover for my own sufferings. Like, I don't have to think about all the bad things that happened to me if I can appoint myself the savior of this other, more oppressed group over here. There's a great drama taking place there that people make up for themselves. And if you interfere with that, if you say, well, actually that oppressed group is getting pretty powerful now, like the cultural tides have turned, and mixing metaphors here, but they're the ones increasingly in charge. It's not that I've messed with that group. I've now messed with you if you fancy yourself the self-appointed guardian of that group and their interests. I've challenged you and I've said, you're not so tough, you're not so special. And then up come all those suppressed feelings that you were trying to distract yourself from by appointing yourself the hero of oppressed group X. And it's not just about them, it's about you. And I may not know that. I'm out there just talking about, disagreeing with the positions of this group. But you've loaded it up with all these emotional expectations and this entire, drama, and I've messed with that. If I know, however, that may be what's going on, then I can understand this isn't just about facts and logic and intellectual or philosophical disagreement. This is about you using all of these issues as a great drama to reflect some other things that I don't even see. And in so understanding, I may know when to pull my punches, when just to walk away, understanding, okay, this person in the comment section, like they're clearly loading this up with some very personal things that I don't even see. And I will say, Zach, the few times, the few times when I've pointed that out, like, dude, this seems to be really personal for you. Like, I don't know what's going on, but I know this isn't just about the issue. People will get enraged, absolutely enraged when you point that out. So I need to stop pointing that out because that's not my place. If there's any family member or church member or some friend in person who's close to that person in real life, that needs to happen on that level. I can't fix that over the internet. And so one of those things we have to do with the bad kinds of canceling or trolling or whatever, we got to know when to just walk away.
Well, and we've mostly talked about people that are canceled unjustly. Either they were actually the hero in the story that we were enjoying, or they were, maybe the victim or something. They weren't the villain that other people make them out to be. We should talk in a second about, some actual villains, I guess you could say, that were canceled righteously. Just a quick note here, though, about heroes, victims, villains. I've heard it said that everyone thinks of themselves as the hero or the victim, but never the villain. And again, I think that's something that we have to kind of gently remind people of like, you may actually be the villain in this story. It's good to always check yourself. And that's why I wrote the article a few weeks back about how God uses story villains for our good. sometimes we have to take a really hard look at the villains and stories and think, am I becoming more like the villain, than the hero in the story? That's very uncomfortable, and no one wants to think of themselves that way. But it's like that famous G.K. Chesterton quote when the newspaper said, what's wrong with the world, and he replied saying, I am. I think that's the posture we have to have, that we are just as capable of being the villain in the story. But let's talk about this third question. If cancellation was moral, how do we view the canceled or their stories? And let's talk about some people, some creators that have been sort of the villain in the story and were somewhat rightly canceled.
Right. Yeah, I mentioned earlier, alluded. I mean, this is basically two film directors, and oddly enough, both of them have worked on many fantasy franchises, but also some of the Marvel superhero films. And yet, both of them have, at least so far, had what I would consider to be very different responses to the attempt to cancel them. One, James Gunn, actually ended up, basically having his kingdom restored to him, rightly or wrongly. That's for you to judge. I have my developing opinions on that, but it's not fixed. I don't know him. All I know is what I see, and some of that may be PR, some of that may be genuine. The other example is Joss Whedon, directed Avengers and Avengers: Age of Ultron, created Firefly, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, a bunch of other things. He, as we mentioned earlier, has been accused of, I would say, far worse offenses, not just words, but actions. There's that divide again. Is this about potentially harmful words or actually harmful actions, that actually harmed people up close and personal? As far as I can tell, there's that disclaimer again. Whedon's actions in person, no matter how long ago, actively harmed people, right up to the apparently the production of what fans derisively refer to as Justice League, the Justice League chopped up version, not Zack Snyder's version, which released in November 2017. And afterwards, it came out, a lot of the cast members said, hey, he was really abusive. Like, he was really threatening. He was really nasty. He wanted Gal Gadot to do this, body contact gag with Ezra Miller, who played the Flash, and she wouldn't do it. He cut out Ray Fisher, who would have played Cyborg. He reduced his story to rubble, bits and pieces of it in the movie because of a really short runtime or whatever reason. It just seemed like the first thing he went to cut was the black guy, and Ray Fisher was not happy about that, and is actually pushed back very strongly against not only Joss Whedon, but those whom Fisher feels supported or enabled him in his bad behavior. So we've got some bad behavior going on here, but then we also have James Gunn, the director of Guardians of the Galaxy and Volume 2. He had a lot to say about how the Guardians were portrayed in Avengers: Infinity War and Endgame. And then recently he just finished a movie for DC, the Distinguished Competition, called The Suicide Squad. Harley Quinn and her amazing friends getting blown up in R rating, and everybody's supposed to be excited about it. And Zach, I'm actually kind of not. I like a lot of James Gunn's work with Guardians of the Galaxy, but I can't care about the Suicide Squad. I'm sorry. I just don't. I want DC hero stories. I want Marvel hero stories. I'll watch the Loki series, but I really don't care about the villains. And deep down, I'm secretly concerned about people who over obsess with the villains and think they're so cool. We live in a society where honor is a distant memory and people are respecting villains more than heroes. Not cool. Anyway, tangent over. I do view James Gunn here as a special case, someone who somehow managed to come back from the dead of cancellation, but his cancellation was a bit unique. To recap, a few years ago, James Gunn was defending someone else, and then someone, I think it was a right-wing marginal fringe provocateur or something, went back and found a bunch of, I will just say it, pedophilic jokes, repeated pedophilic jokes that James Gunn was making, stuff I don't want to repeat here, and basically presented the screen caps and said, hey, is this you? This is a few years before Guardians of the Galaxy, and James Gunn's still pretty fringe. I think he made a Scooby-Doo movie. He's pretty young in his career, and was just making these nasty jokes, doing nasty costume parties and stuff, just really terrible stuff. The Disney Corporation immediately went, okay, that guy's out. Like, we're family friendly. We're not hiring a guy or making him our star player who was making jokes about kids. What were we thinking? I don't know if they didn't see this. You'd think they would have come up in the vetting, but who knows what happened. Anyway, After that, it ended up that everybody came to James Gunn's defense. For one thing, they hated it that it had been a right-wing guy who had been part of his cancellation, finding these old tweets. And for another thing, all the actors, I think it was all of them from Guardians of the Galaxy, stepped forward. They actually signed a document that said, we've never seen him behave like this. Those were terrible jokes, but he doesn't actually do this. Everybody came to his defense. And of course, Warner Brothers immediately went, Guardians of the Galaxy guy. Okay, you're hired. So now James Gunn is one of the few people who's worked for both Marvel and DC, because once he's finished with the Suicide Squad, he's going right back for Guardians Volume 3, I guess. But it's important to note what Gunn did after. It's hilarious. His last name is Gunn, by the way. Gunn. I don't know why I find that funny, but what he did afterwards is actually went back and I got his tweets. What some of the good things that he said, that's up to you to decide whether this was sufficient. But when he was still fired, who knows what he was saying behind the scenes with Disney, and he probably knew there was a lot of public support for him. So I'm not saying he's an angel or this is a fantastic example of repentance, but here are the tweets he said in response. Quote, 1, many people who have followed my career know when I started, I viewed myself as a provocateur, making movies and telling jokes that were outrageous and taboo. As I have discussed publicly many times, as I've developed as a person, so has my work and my humor. 2, it's not to say I'm better, but I am very, very different than I was a few years ago. Today, I try to root my work in love and connection and less in anger. My days saying something just because it's shocking and trying to get a reaction are over. 3, in the past, I have apologized for humor of mine that hurt people. I truly felt sorry and meant every word of my apologies. 4, for the record, when I made these shocking jokes, I wasn't living them out. I know this is a weird statement to make and seems obvious, but still, here I am saying it. 5, anyway, that's the completely honest truth. I used to make a lot of offensive jokes. I don't anymore. I don't blame my past self for this, but I like myself more and feel like a more full human being and creator today. Love you to you all. End quote. I think that's a sick there at the last. Otherwise, this was really carefully written. He had semicolons and everything. We'll link to that Twitter thread in the show notes. I know, there's some good here. I wish he'd been more repentant, I think, being very clear. Hey, it's wrong to make jokes about children. He was literally making jokes about abusing children. It was stupid. These are just stupid. They're not even funny if you see them. They're just dumb, as well as being repulsive. But I did appreciate his seeming understanding about his motives. Guys, what I was doing was rooted in anger. He seemed to rightly identify that as the sin. And in his case, because he's not been accused at all of actually doing those kinds of abuses to children or grownups or women, especially, that's what I looked for. I looked for the support of the female cast members in his movies, and it was right up there with the male support. Everybody was saying that actually is not who he is. We've never seen him do anything like that. But he also doesn't admit to sins that he apparently did not do. He concentrates on who he was as a person. He speaks of it in a very humanistic way. That's not who I am, but he says it in a different way. There's less of sin and repentance here, but he does emphasize growth. It seems to be a calculated pushback against the notion that people are flat two-dimensional beings across their lifespans, which is just not true. But he also makes it very clear, I didn't do that. I was making nasty jokes about that, but I've never actually done that. And that matters to me. I think that matters if someone is apologizing for what they actually did, but clarifying what they didn't do. I think I can at least respect that as a legitimate self-defense to very graciously push back against slander. And I think that actually someone who was wrongly canceled, like Gina Carano or anybody else, could learn from that. Now, there's got to be a gentle way to push back against any mob and say, no, this actually isn't me. Prove it. Prove that's what I did. That's not true. Gina Carano is actually doing that. She's saying no, I don't hate anyone. This is ridiculous. In this case, though, there was more mob in favor of James Gunn, and it was somebody at Disney who jumped the gun and just went ahead and fired him. So it was a little bit different. He wasn't actually facing some giant mob.
Yeah, well, and you could sort of understand why Disney did that with the nature of his jokes, and then this, concern of is he making these jokes because he's actually participated in that, horrible crime? It's not just a sin, but it's a crime to do the things he's joking about. Or is he just callous to that happening? Could he have looked the other way if someone else had committed that crime? And I mean, I think that was a good thing by Disney to sort of have that cautious approach of just be like, what you're talking about is a very serious matter and you're not taking it seriously. So we don't know why. And we have to sort of force you to rebuild that trust now. Yeah. And like you said, as far as I know, nothing's ever come out about abusive behavior that he's done, which is good. And I think a lot of people here get caught in the thing you've quoted before, Stephen, of the is it screw tape letters? I know it's C.S. Lewis where he's like, suppose you read in the newspaper that someone is not as
Mere
bad.
Christianity. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
mere
it's mere
Christianity.
Christianity. Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, you read that someone is not as bad as you thought they were. Do you get upset because you wanted to really, you wanted them to be exposed for the villain they are? I think that's sort of the quandary a lot of people find themselves in, especially because he, like you said, he was called out by a conservative person who wanted to sort of, I don't know, get revenge, I guess, on
Or a
liberal.
right wing person. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
they're not always the same. I forget who it was. It was just some crackpot out there somewhere.
right. And I think a lot of people got behind that because they're like, well, turnabout is fair play.
Exactly.
It's right wing people always getting canceled, so it's about time a left wing person gets canceled. And whether or not he's really guilty.
Yeah, I don't go for this mutually assured destruction thing. We cannot
Right.
go for that.
Yeah, we shouldn't want to join a counter mob just to sort of balance the scales. Like, that's not going to work.
Right. Shapiro actually, in that interview, he actually mentioned that he disagreed with Carano's, overwrought Holocaust comparisons like that.
Yeah.
Whatever you think of him or Daily Wire guys or whatever, I think it was both him and Andrew Klavan, who's another podcast host there, who's actually a professing Christian who's written epic fantasy. So this person is a fellow traveler, even if we don't know him in person. But both of them, I think, Shapiro definitely, I think Klavan also echoed this a bit. Both of them said, it's just generally not a good idea to do overwrought Holocaust comparisons.
Oh yeah, it's invoking Godwin's law.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a bit amateurish, but that's just the point. It's amateur stuff. It's not intentional, wicked. Hey, we're just like, so-and-so group, being persecuted. Like, there is a difference, and a discerning person, especially if you knew the person, would know the difference. And in this case, apparently discerning people, like including Karen Gillan and Zoe Saldana and other, female actors who'd worked closely with James Gunn to make his Guardians of the Galaxy movies, they were among those who defended him. And that I do look for that. I look for people who, if he'd been fired and if he had acted on these terrifically nasty jokes, then people needed to come out of the woodwork and say, yeah, he did this. I don't even remember any false accusations. Whereas other directors like Bryan Singer, who has been into really, really terrible stuff, or there's another director, Brett Ratner, who basically got removed from polite Hollywood society because he was abusive, at least on the adult level. And then who's the actor? Oh yeah, Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey as well. Yeah, he's gone. Like, they literally reshot his part for a movie. Like, Christopher Plummer took his place. It was crazy.
Yeah.
But some of that does need to say something very serious about the most serious offense here, which is abuse.
Yeah.
Abuse and assault and legit harmful discrimination, particularly against women. And those who are in vulnerable places. We actually somehow haven't name checked Harvey Weinstein. I wouldn't even call that a cancellation. What he did, I mean, just rape, assault, just total abuse of the power that he had as an executive producer. Like, that's not cancellation. That's just the legal process. That is way different, though, from what was going on with James Gunn, which is just words. And I wish he'd said more. But I'm glad that he said what he did, and I will go out on a limb, at least as of this date. I'm glad that he's back working on Guardians of the Galaxy. It's not that I really wanted him to finish that, because the one thing I cannot forgive him for is Guardians Volume 2. It was dumb. I'm sorry, Marvel fans. I'm sorry. Like, it's actually,
I liked it.
It's worse than Thor: The Dark World. I saw it again just to try to see if it would get any better. It doesn't. It's just, I know he says he wants to do stuff out of love, and there's some of that in there, but it's just not a good movie. It's not one of the better Marvel movies at all. I enjoyed The Incredible Hulk from 2008 more than Guardians Volume 2. I enjoy Iron Man 2 better than Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Okay, I'll stop. If y'all love it, if y'all want to see, Yondu slaughtering a bunch of people while the fun music plays, And then we're supposed to critique the big ego planet guy because he's going to slaughter a bunch of people without the cool music playing. If you like that kind of double messaging, then go for it. I think it's hypocritical, and I just hope that that's the only hypocritical thing that James Gunn has done. But even if Guardians 2 was good, could we still enjoy it? And even if he had not repented, like, that's another question. And I guess we'll close out here in a little bit, talking about, okay, how do you look now at the Avengers movie? Joss Whedon, like, how do you look at that? We'll have to get to that kind of to finally cap off this very long and surprisingly in-depth discussion.
Well, that's the question, right? Can you separate the art from the artist? Can you enjoy the age-old question? Can you enjoy music, a book, a movie, a painting? Something created by someone who is very fallible or fallen or villainous. That's not an easy question. I've had my own moments with this with Michael Jackson, who I grew up loving all of his music, and I sort of don't want to hear it anymore. And even in totally different spheres, with Ravi Zacharias, now there's pretty awful things now that have come out about him posthumously, and all the accusations were true, and they're even worse than we thought. I have a lot of his books on my shelf, and I'm just like, I don't know if I ever want to read those again or have my kids read them. It's too mixed up now. I can't like erase those books from my mind, right? The sort of things that I've learned from him are still good things. I was listening to some commentary about Ravi Zacharias. This podcaster brought up Philippians 1:15. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. So I think the best description I heard of Ravi Zacharias, he wasn't simply a fallen preacher. He wasn't even a wolf in sheep's clothing. He was a wolf in shepherd's clothing. So, in a lot of similarities, we'll see with Joss Whedon in a minute. But what do you do with the things that they produced? And I think this Philippians 1 passage is a good starting point that, you know what? He preached the gospel. He was using the gospel in his position to abuse other people, but the gospel still got out, and that is still a valuable thing. It doesn't excuse anything he did. It doesn't minimize it. But we have to sort of, it's okay to rejoice that the gospel got out. I guess that's all I'm going to say, is that I'm glad for how my mind was changed and other people heard the gospel. That's about all I can say, though.
I think that is a really good parallel, I think, for trying to understand someone who was rightly canceled, whether it's a film director or novelist or somebody like that, whether professing Christian or not. And yeah, I mean, the template I kind of fixed on here is that of Joss Whedon. We've already introduced him. If you're a fan person, especially if you enjoy the first two Avengers movies, you have benefited from his work. Going back to the 90s, I was actually reviewing an article posted at a feminist website. We will link to that into the show notes, called "The Rise and Fall of Joss Whedon and the Myth of I think it's the feminist creator." He was known as a big feminist in the 90s. Like, he made Buffy, this teenage high school student who slaughters vampires, kind of subverted the horror trope, of the weak woman who actually goes out after the vampires. And full disclosure, I don't think I've seen a single even clip of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but I understand its significance for serialized television and in the portrayal of female heroes in visual storytelling. And yet it turns out that plot twist, it was Agatha all along. Sorry, bit of a spoiler. Sorry about that. No, it was misogyny all along. And apparently, whatever feminist impulses he had were coexisting with some much nastier impulses. Everybody's going back and going, wait a minute, was this guy really a feminist? His ex-wife came out and she said this was all a big cover. He was terrible to me. He was terrible to other women. He was, using me as a cover and going out and, doing stuff with the actresses, and like, all this is public. Otherwise this would be slander. He's a public figure, and this person put that in public. So, if they've sinned, like, I don't think that us repeating that is also a sin. But if you disagree, send us a note. But since then, I mentioned already the Justice League debacle, which as a fan, I'm very invested in that discussion. The actual Justice League comes out on March the 18th on HBO Max from the original director, who's, by the way, gotten nothing but respect and approval from people he's worked with too. I haven't heard any scandal about Zack Snyder, at least not yet. Zack, you better behave yourself. Snyder, not podcast host, but you behave yourself too. So will I. However, Whedon has also been hit just within the past month by a fresh round of accusations from actors who were in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So we're going back to the 90s now. One actress in particular said, yeah, when I got pregnant, he was nasty to me. He was abusive. And he wrote me out of the show with a sudden coma, after I got impregnated by a demon. And well, that seems really vindictive. I wasn't there even for the fandom, so I'm just repeating what I've read. But it seems enough to say that Whedon is being canceled, and possibly for better reasons. That kind of misconduct, not just words, but actual action, not just words spread to other people across the globe, but action to the people with whom you work in person. These are very different things. And I don't think that even in our enjoyments of fantasy storytelling, we ought to be enabling this kind of thing or looking the other way just because, well, the guy made a really great show with spaceships. They're superheroes. Whedon, for his part, has not said anything about this. He has gone completely silent. And while I don't believe that silence is violence, it could go a long way just to hear him repent for this or repent for something. Maybe he could pull a James Gunn and say, yes, I am guilty for this, this, and this. Here's why I think I was doing it. I think I'm a better person now. That's kind of humanist language. It's not very Christian. Whedon's a big humanist. He's made that very clear, but he's also made it clear he likes to play around with religion. How many times does Ultron in his movie talk about religion? He references Noah and the Ark and says something about Captain America, God soldier, or something like that. And that's Whedon for you. Shepherd Book from Firefly was this kind of religious projection, intended to reflect some measure of faith. So Whedon ought to know better. He ought to know something about repentance and forgiveness. I'm sure he's being advised by PR people, hey, you got to say something, but he's just gone completely dark. And that's disappointing. So as of this recording, we could probably say, all right, here's an example of maybe something like cancel culture behaving rightly. What then do we do with Whedon's art? I, for my part, think I can still enjoy his stuff mostly. And the Avengers movies in particular, which I already enjoyed. I actually still defend Age of Ultron as a good movie, not the best, but it's a good movie. I think that Whedon catches a lot of unfair criticism for that movie. There's a lot being asked of him for the biggest superhero franchise in the world at that time. Some of that is just pressure on him. And, who knows? Maybe that was a factor in on-set abuses. I certainly hope not, because I don't care how pressured you are. You don't do that to human beings, even if you're making a movie and it's really hard and you're working 20 hours a day. At least apologize for that, even if you think that the pressure was unfair. But Whedon doesn't owe me an apology. I'm a fan, but I'm not the one offended. I am a distant observer. I'm not the person who deserves an apology for that. So let's say he appears on Twitter tomorrow and apologizes to the fans. Okay, you apologize for moral failures to the fans, but the first person you need to apologize to is the actresses on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or Ray Fisher from Justice League, or Gal Gadot from Justice League, or any of the other folks that feel apparently very legitimately that they were actively harmed, not just by words, but by action. Apologize to those people, and then maybe put that apology in public, because this is a public issue of public interest. But the first apology needs to be to those folks. I am not God. I cannot forgive Joss Whedon's sin. Even the Pharisees know that someone who is not God cannot forgive the sins that someone committed against another person. That is a kind of blasphemy, and you're in trouble if the Pharisees have better theology about sin and forgiveness than you do. I can still, though, enjoy Avengers Or if I was a Buffy fan, Buffy fans, yeah, we want to hear from you. Let me know then. Okay, what do you think about the show now? I'd be very curious now. At the same time, and this goes especially for someone who apparently was doing far worse things like Harvey Weinstein, I think it's fitting to look back on the stuff that that person made, even as you still enjoy it, and not separate the art from the artist. Where might be the idols or the messaging in these stories that slipped past our radar last time? And I noticed this when I was reading a big coverage about Harvey Weinstein a few years ago, when the reporter who wrote the article observed that his movies defined our perception of women. And that made me realize, yes, they did. And so if the movies are doing this redefinition, what about the person who is financing and producing these movies? How have these people contributed to how we see women in society? Because you might be able to separate the art from the artist, but you cannot separate the art from the consequences. There is a lot of scenes in these movies that the actresses have come forward later and said, you know, that was a bounded choice. I didn't want to do those scenes. And we talked about that several episodes ago with the Witcher show. And we talked about that some with Cap Stewart. That's real. And we need to look at these stories with open eyes and then maybe realize, you know, the artist does affect the art, or even the producer or director does affect the art. Let's take note of maybe some of those Easter eggs that in retrospect seem to have been hearkening to the egregious moral failings of the art creator.
My personal opinion, just my total speculation, is that why Whedon has been silent is he's probably being, well, first of all, he's probably being advised by counsel to do that, because I think some of the accusations may rise to the level of if not criminal law, then like a civil suit. So I think he's probably being told by some lawyers not to say anything that could indict himself or whatever. But I think that, again, just playing the dollar psychologist right now on the podcast, I think that he has too much of cognitive dissonance between this hero that he put himself out to be. You know, he was called this, you know, male feminist hero, but now it turns out that he was using his position to not protect women but abuse them. There's been a lot of write-ups, like you have one there in the notes from Jezebel. I found one on GQ from Unheard. Douglas Murray has talked about this beware the creepy male feminist. A lot of people can see this pretty clearly, that Whedon is one of those people that shouts so loudly that he's the good guy that you're like, maybe something's going on here. Like he seems to be fighting these invisible foes that are supposedly threatening women, when it's really himself that he's seeing. He's seeing a version of himself, at least, as the bad guy. Some people have likened it to the cuttlefish, the male cuttlefish that can sort of trick other fish into thinking that it's a female. It uses that disguise to take advantage of the actual female cuttlefish. So I think that Whedon is in that place psychologically. Just again, my speculation that he can't get out of this view of himself as the hero. And he's not unable to see himself as the villain. The stories still have that power to help us see how villains become the way they are, and we have to sort of look into that. I didn't really know much of his films before Avengers, so I couldn't speak to too much of his earlier work. I will say that it sort of gave me a creepy vibe, though, you know, and not just because I'm not into vampires, but there was this disconnect that I saw of like female empowerment, while at the same time it looked like objectification.
Well, have you ever seen Firefly season 1? Only season 1? There was never a season 2?
Yeah, a few episodes of it.
Yeah. Some of those, like even I think I watched through the series maybe twice, and frankly, there are a few scenes that I fast forwarded past because no one, even the fans, don't talk about often enough the objectification moments in there. Inara in particular, who is like this legalized prostitute who's running her services out of the shuttlecraft adjoined to the Firefly ship. You know, her little storyline there is just laden with these this innuendo and objectification moments, and she's presented as this strong character, you know, the prostitute with the heart of gold, you know, and enough said about that.
Right.
But actually, speaking of Heart of Gold, I think, is that the title? There's an episode. If it's not that title, then it's very similar to it, where the crew of the ship Serenity goes to this planet. No, it's all moons. That's right. This is a Firefly Flames are going to get on me, but there's this moon where there is a brothel, and this whole episode is basically equating sex with love. And it's all these women there, it is the most anti-healthy feminine thing that I've seen. And I watched this barely because the whole plot is that there's these bad guys that are trying to invade it. It's a last stand type thing from my memory. But that in particular, I think if I were to ever go back and try to get through that episode, it would not age well at all. It seems pretty terrible and a pretty open revelation of some kind of hidden misogyny there, because it's trying to play it both ways. Oh, look at these strong women. They're prostitutes, but they're all packing guns and they're going to shoot at the men who come at them. They get to express their, sex work, their sexuality on their own terms, and nobody's going to tell them otherwise. And I mean, we're now about to have a whole cultural battle enjoined about, whether or not sex work is healthy and whether or not it's empowering. Feminism is going to be split right down the center over that issue. And I will go on record. I would stand with even feminists who say, no, this is inherently demeaning to women. This is not a healthful thing at all. That episode in particular, I think, might reveal more of what was going on. You said it, Zach, kind of trying to play it both ways. This idea that, the strong female character is the one who is going to express sexuality in this way and this way and this way, which just happens to endorse a lot of disordered male fantasies in particular. Going further on this topic, we might get in trouble, so I may just leave it at that. But that's kind of part of just going back and watching this stuff again with open eyes and realizing, yes, there's a lot of common grace here, but there's also a lot of idolatry. And that is how Christians ought to be watching anything. Whether or not the artist is a morally upstanding figure, there will be graces, there will be idols. And I'm going to end at least my soliloquy with a quote from, I think this is Whedon's scripted line for The Vision, the synthezoid Marvel superhero from near the end of Age of Ultron, and just recently being seen again in the Disney Plus series WandaVision. Vision catches up to the last android that has the Ultron code, and they have an exchange on a hill as the sun sets. And Ultron says, yes, I'm the last one. And they have this discussion about humanity. And Vision says something to the effect of, well, I just got here, but I think that you are judging the human race wrong. Here's the direct quote, there is grace in their failings, end quote. I think that's a good line. And if Wheaton wrote it, that's actually remarkably self-aware. There is grace in their failings, but the failings are real. And that doesn't mean that the grace overwhelms the failings. Ultron in particular needs to be destroyed because he's the one who is trying to cancel someone for their failings, irrespective of the grace. But that's not how we ought to behave. And Vision is correct there. I think in that statement, it's actually a very Christian statement.
Well, and I think that's the right response, Stephen, is that any art that we enjoy is made by a fallen, infallible human. So, of course, there's going to be something wrong with it if you look close enough. And we just have to have that tension at all times that we are going to find things that reflect the sinful nature of the Creator, but we're also going to find things that reflect the image of God. And you know what? Nothing that we enjoy in this world is going to be fully one or the other for the most part. That we're not going to find the the perfect movie or the perfect book made by the perfect person. There's going to be something wrong with it, but there's going to be something redeemable about it. That's the hard thing about enjoying pop culture.
And it should be hard because there's only one Savior in whom there is no failing and only grace, and that's Jesus Christ.
Well, to you, our fantastic fans, we'd love to know what you think about these different figures that were canceled or held accountable, however you want to look at it. So send us a message and what are some of your thoughts? about these situations. And we're going to go and read from something we got in the mailbag from Sherry after our last episode about do Christians really need science fiction? And Sherry says, quote, I have thought that were I ever to teach a class on cross-cultural evangelism, I would recommend a few works of science fiction as well as more conventional textbooks. Science fiction can help us explore the alienness of other cultures as well as the dangers of assuming similitude based on a superficial resemblance between cultures. It can also warn us of the dangers of assuming that all others think and act as we do or should do so. Some titles that come to mind are Speaker for the Dead by Orson Scott Card, James White's Sector General novels, which are definitely dated, but we meet many aliens with unique needs requiring creative treatment at this hospital space station, and perhaps the Children of Time series by Adrian Tchaikovsky, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, with a strong disclaimer for language, end quote. Well, thank you, Sherry. Those are, that I keep hearing that book recommended, Speaker for the Dead. I've read Ender's Game, and I know I need to read that one next. So that's a good reminder for that. And yeah, I think I downloaded a sample of Children of Time, so I'll have to check that out too. But thanks for writing us, Sherry.
She's so correct in talking about the cross-cultural evangelism aspects that are unique to science fiction. One thing that my co-author, Jared Moore, is fond of saying is that a rightful biblical engagement with popular culture will not only help prepare you or your children to understand and engage the world around us, but actually prepare to understand and engage the next world, the next generation, the world of the future, even after the parents are gone. This is a missional strategy, and science fiction is uniquely equipped to help with trying to project where the future could go, and how Christians should respond, which is hopefully a lot of what we've done in this episode about the cancel culture. Next on Fantastical Truth, speaking of predicting the future, usually we set up our very next episode here to end-cap the episode. However, Zach and I both live in Central Texas, and if you've been paying attention to the news, you know that Central Texas got hit with an unseasonably extreme cold weather. It got down to almost 9 degrees, which is, a day at the park for someone from Minnesota, but down here in Central Texas, that is a thing unheard of. The pipes busted, the power went off, people still don't have water or they have to boil all their water. There's been a lot of societal upheaval here, and so we need to get to work planning the next round of episodes. We're going to have a lot of interviews, hopefully coming up within the next month or so. Some fantasy authors that we've been meaning to get onto Fantastical Truth for quite some time. And we will continue to be exploring more stories made by Christians in the fantastical genres. Make sure to stop by Lorehaven.com as well. Our new version is rolling on quite well, going into our third month now of 2021 with some fantastic articles from recurring writers and the very best Christian fantastical novel creators. We also post new reviews on Fridays and, of course, the new podcast episodes on Tuesdays, except when the severe weather hits. Meanwhile, practice appropriate accountability with the people around you, especially if you are a member of a local biblical church. Don't join any cancel mobs. If you do join some call over social media to hold someone accountable for bad behavior, do your homework. Make sure that it's not just because that person said something, but try to pay attention to what that person has been repeatedly accused of behavior-wise. Have they been cruel or abusive to the people that they've worked with, as opposed to simply saying something potentially offensive over social media? And just make sure always that even when we are confronting these kinds of mobs, that we are doing so with grace. We must be better than the cancel mobs. We must, as Christ's representatives, show love even to our enemies, as we continue to seek and find fantastical truth.